So you are a social worker. You journey with families of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and two-spirited people. Sometimes you help them as they interact with the police or with other components of the justice or child welfare systems. There are a number of differences from when an Indigenous girl goes missing to when a non-Indigenous person goes missing. Sometimes the media coverage can be different, how the police interact with the family can be different. So could you summarize for us from your experience, what does that look like? What are these differences?
I think, I recommended a book to you when we first started speaking called If I Go Missing, it was a letter written by a teenage girl written to the chief of police here in Winnipeg. Talking about the very real possibility that she could go missing. And one of the things she asked for, she was like, plaster my face over the media because I didn't decide to run away. And I think that's one of the things is sometimes girls in care or women who are involved in exploitation, it's assumed that they've run away or that their risky behavior has resulted in them going missing. Even if they're not involved in those behaviors, sometimes it's assumed that they're involved in those behaviors and they're treated with a little bit less dignity, perhaps. There's historically been pretty bad relationships between Indigenous people and police. Makes people less likely to report to police when somebody does go missing. Whether or not the police are going to do a good job, people don't trust them to do a good job. And then experiencing trials with families, I think, like court proceedings, it can very much feel like a victim is on trial. Yeah. Were they drinking? Were they aggressive? Were they using substances? What were they doing to cause their own death is what it very much feels like families are being asked in trials. So, and I don't know if that's the case for non-Indigenous people as well, because that's not the field that I've chosen to work in, but it very much feels like this victim of a homicide is been painted as the problem in her own murder trial.
Wow. To give us an idea of the scope of this issue, how many families are you actually dealing with?
So I have a counterpart who works with northern Manitoba. So if you split Manitoba in half, north and south, I work with the southern half. I believe I have about 200, between 200 and 300 registered participants. But I'm a voluntary program. People seek us out or come in, they have to register voluntarily to be a part of our program. So these are people who have sought out additional supports. It's not the true breadth of the issue. There are certainly a high number of families who are not a part of our program at all.
That's it blows my mind that there would be that many families here in Manitoba, and I know that every province has got an organization like yourself, so the numbers are staggering when you think about all the provinces and all the territories in our country. The work that you do, Tobi, is just so necessary. The weight of the grief of these families is just hard to imagine. You've told me before that your organization provides kits for those that are still wanting to search. Can you tell us a little bit more about those?
So we have two types of kits that we typically do. One of them is a physical search kit. So for families who are actively searching grounds or searching areas, physical areas for their lost ones, we provide a kit that would include flashlights, high visibility vests, high visibility tape to mark off certain areas, snacks, water bottles, sunscreen, bug spray, and then any additional items that a family may need. We have provided shovels in the past for families. Some of our families are searching for someone who's recently gone missing for evidence or for any items of clothing, any things like that. Some families have been looking for a long time and have come to terms with the fact that they're searching for their loved one's remains, and continue to search in the same way. So we provide kits for those families. And then we also provide we call it our missing persons and persons at risk toolkit. So it's a document toolkit. You give it to a family immediately following someone going missing. And it has various documents that they can use. So one of them is a 24-hour checklist. So in the first 24 hours after you've noticed that your family member is missing or you believe somebody to be missing, what should you be doing?
Wow. So sobering to hear these realities. Such a sad reality for Indigenous families here in Canada. In 2019, a national inquiry into missing and murdered women, Indigenous women and girls, and Two-Spirited People was formed, and it revealed, and I'm going to quote here, that persistent and deliberate human and Indigenous rights violations and abuses are the root causes behind Canada's staggering rates of violence against Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people, end of quote. There is just so much involved here, right? There's racism, colonialism, the legacy of residential schools. Karen, can you talk to me a bit about how these things are so inextricably linked to this crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women?
I think one of the big issue, and still we're seeing generational trauma from residential schools when kids were taken away from home, and some never coming home, and some people say residential school wasn't that bad, but just the fact that you're taken away from your family, your community, your land is trauma enough. And so many of our people don't talk about it. It's something that is not talked about. Nobody knows. Like, both my grandmothers went to their grave without ever talking about their experience in residential school. And so there's those things that are not talked about. And so some of the generations after that don't know why the struggle is, or why some of these struggles continue to happen. There's a huge identity crisis among our people. There's many of our people don't know where they come from, who they belong to, and those are essential to a human being, to know that they belong somewhere. And so that crisis is so huge that many kids don't even know what reserve they're from, even to this day. If you ask them, like, what reserve do you come from, they don't even know, like, where they're from. And so the loss of so many things, the loss of culture, the loss of language, the loss of ceremonies even, and the loss of that community connection has been there for so long now that people don't know who they are. This is the plight of our people.
In talking about, like, residential schools and family connection, like, colonialism targeted the family system. Kids were taken to residential schools. Parents weren't allowed to teach them to be Indigenous adults or teenagers even. And then came the rise of child welfare systems here in Canada. It's not really what we're here to talk about, but Indigenous children are vastly overrepresented in that system as well, also being raised outside of their homes. So when you lose that core piece of your identity, everything else kind of starts to follow. Yeah. And I think, as I said, Indigenous women are the ones who carry life. They're such a central part of Indigenous life. Mm-hmm. They're the water carriers, they're the fire keepers, they're the ones who taught me how to cut meat.
Yeah.
So when you start to lose that, you lose respect for that which brought you into the world, for that which cared for you as you were in the world. So I think it starts to lead into that violence towards women.